Lots of diagrams talk about the structure of the industry. Start with, let's start with this organization, or let's start with the Network Rail, or start with the train operator. I'd like, no, the railway is there to move people and things, and so it makes sense for us to start with. Well, let's start with passengers first of all. And so the way I'm going to structure this diagram is, what are the things, what is the distance from the people and the things, the freight customers. The distance from those people is how I've created this structure, this way to kind of structure out and show the structure of the industry. So passengers, what are the things that passengers do? Well, they generally get onto a train. That's what defines them being rail passengers. And so we have our train operators. Within the train operators, and of course, to the guests, shout at me, interrupt me when you want to add anything in here. But so we have the train operators. And of the train operators, we have got devolved operators like, these are supposed to be little, by the way. Don't expect to read these. We've got, at the top here, we've got ScotRail, we've got TFW, Caledonian Sleeper, which is also kind of ScotRail. We've got a whole bunch of either being or soon to be or already are gobbled up by the Department for Transport's operator, train operating companies. And then we have a bunch of open access operators that are going to fall outside of that, the likes of Hull Trains, Lumo Grand Central, Eurostar, Heathrow Express. And so those are our train operators. Not within there are charter operators, by the way, as well. They're absolutely fit within that. So the heritage and charter operators, but there's only so much space on a screen. But you don't just get on a train. You might buy a ticket, and you might buy a ticket from a train operator, but also you might buy a ticket from a third-party vendor. And those third-party vendors might be, Trainline is a well-known one, Real-Time Tickets, Tom Cairns' baby, Trenitalia, and lots of other European vendors that dish out train tickets. But also there's the commercial vendors who do things, Capita and the others as well, who do these things for business as well. So, you may buy a ticket from a third-party vendor. If things go wrong, you might want to complain to the rail ombudsman as a passenger. And you might generally want your opinion to be heard about the railway service that you have and experience through Transport Focus, which is the body that manages and collects data on passenger perception of the rail industry. So as a passenger, this is kind of what the railway looks like to you. This is your experience of the railway for the most part. There are nuances and subtleties we'll get into. But if you have a thing, an object you want to move around, then you're a freight customer. And the picture's a little bit less complicated in some ways and substantially more complicated in others for you if you're a freight customer. So yes, your thing will go onto a train operated by one of the freight operators. And there are a fair few of those. It's diversifying year on year. But you also have a body that you can interact with that advocates for you and generally is your ally and also hunts out opportunities and solutions for you, which is Rail Freight Group. They're very active Rail Freight. They are a trade body, but they do more than that. They are very active in creating opportunities and representing freight customers as well as the freight operators and the logistics chain. So there is our front line. But, we're missing something here, which is, well, a variety of things. We're missing, for starters, trains, because at the moment we just have the staff that provide the trains. Some of the freight operators have their own bits of train, but not their entirety of their trains. And so at the moment we don't really have any trains or tracks. So, okay, let's get some trains involved. So the rolling stock operators provide a sizable chunk of the trains running on the rail network. They run trains for, they lease trains to both freight operators and train operators. So if I'm going to start my bits of red string, they send trains in all directions. But the rolling stock manufacturers are also a key part because they, whilst obviously the leasers they buy the stuff through finance from the rolling stock manufacturers, the rolling stock manufacturers also directly supply the train operators, whether it's for new trains or maintaining trains. And then you also have dedicated rolling stock maintainers. So all of a sudden, to get your trains, suddenly you're saying, oh, crikey, that's a bit of a complicated corner of things then. But at the moment, we have nowhere to put the trains because also you have to have some track. And most of the track in Britain is owned and managed by Network Rail. Little Network Rail here, which is actually an enormous organisation. So, yeah, so you've got Network Rail. And also, I'm cheating a little bit because passengers might also see Network Rail staff at the Network Rail managed stations. So they might have a little bit of direct interaction with Network Rail. Fine. So what else then? Because you can't just have track and then install it, or it doesn't just exist in isolation. You have to maintain it. You have to come in as a construction contractor to build new bits of it, to replace bridges, to replace all the things, upgrade stations. You need legal providers, you need land and property providers, technology providers, comms providers. I mean, this is barely scratching the surface. This box here represents thousands of suppliers with greater or lesser extent, private entities that supply pretty much everyone on screen at the moment, and also lots of people who are about to appear on screen. So that's a sizable chunk of third-party sort of private suppliers that provide the industry. But there they are. What else do you need? Well, okay, you might have... So you've got all these vendors, you've got all these train operating companies, but the tickets cost a number, and you might travel on multiple train companies. And also the information, the data of the systems coming through Network Rail has to somehow get sent out to all these people, and that's coordinated through the Rail Delivery Group with an increasingly diminished role. The RDG there are a part of making that system work. Also administering services is a bunch of devolved transport bodies. So you've got the obvious ones of Transport Scotland and Transport for Wales, but you also have the plethora of other ones. You've got these subnational transport bodies, don't get attached to them. And then you've got a bunch of combined authority transport bodies, of which some have been around for ages and some are quite new. So TFGM's been around for absolutely ages. TfL, people will know very well, of course. TfWM is increasingly familiar. But there are some other new players as well, like Tees Valley, MCA. These are, Mersey Travel is very well known, as well as being a train operator themselves. Nexus, Britannia Metro. So these devolved bodies are also part of the rail industry, and to some extent in the future will, I would hope, start taking a greater control over their own rail services as well. Then slam into the middle of this, Great British Railways, and underneath these is a logo I forgot to add, which is the DFTO, which is the operator part of the DFT. That's kind of attached to this GBR thing. Well, there's no GBR yet, but there is Shadow GBR, and it's sitting, nestling itself. It's currently still symbiotically attached to Network Rail, so it's really just an offshoot of Network Rail at the moment. Shadow GBR is sort of squeezing its way in to take over bits of the rail industry that we'll get into in the future, but it does exist, and it is having an increasing role even before some of the primary legislation starts landing. The DFT, of course, has a major role to play because it is the thing that coordinates Network Rail, it coordinates Shadow GBR, it coordinates all sorts, so it sits above everything. It nominally should and does set strategy, but also so too at an equal footing to the Scottish Government and Welsh Government. So the actual government, not the transport authorities, but the actual Scottish and Welsh governments have their role to play. The ORR, if you've got all this stuff, well, it's all very well the DFT being in charge of it all, but how do you control disputes between different passenger operators and freight customers? And also, how do you regulate the funding settlement for Network Rail? Well, that's what the ORR exists to do. So the Office of Rail and Roads sits there. Oh, and you might want, okay, EDF, what? What are EDF doing here? EDF are the single largest supplier to the railway because they're the ones who provide all of our electricity. They are our electricity supplier, and we spend hundreds of millions of pounds on electricity. So they, in their own right, are a nominally private, I'm using massive rabbit ears here, nominally private organisation that's in charge of sending electricity into our electrified railways and our railway stations and so on and so on. So thank you, French government, for that. So it's another government body that just happens to be a private entity in the UK. And of course, in charge of all of this is Treasury. I'm hearing boos in the audience, but fine, that's fine. So, right, I'm going to briefly pause there and go to our guests and say, is this all making sense? Does this match your understanding so far of what we're going through? It's a little bit, I'm doing the manic kind of pinboard string thing on the screen, but we're kind of halfway through. But the next bit should go a bit more quickly. But that's okay. So we've got passengers and freight customers able to get people and things on trains. We've got tracks to put them on. We've got signals to move them around. We've got signalers to send the trains safely in all directions. We've got a strategy and devolved transport bodies telling what the trains need to be doing. We've powered the electric railway. We've funded it all. Thank you, Treasury-ish. Right. Okay. Well, what's next then? So you've done all that. Well, there are a bunch of, if you've got the Treasury funding things, well, they like to have greater control over, that's me, I don't know why my face has appeared there, let's get rid of that. They like to have control over their major capital projects, so you've then got nominal quangos of East West Rail and HS2 Limited. Also, you've got this new thing called Platform 4, which is what London Continental Railways and Network Rail's property body has been merged recently into. No idea what that's actually going to look like, but it's kind of its own quango now. So you've got these things that are kind of basically directly connected to Treasury. Okay, fine. The thing is, you've got all of that industry, and a lot of it requires a bunch of services to exist. a lot of it, unfortunately, relies on contingent staff, not least the construction contractors, but also some of the train operating companies, and some of the maintainers and manufacturers. So then you need some staff. You also need someone to design the railway. You need to manage facilities. You've got to hire plant and equipment. So you've got a bunch of other stuff and people landlords that you have to hire stuff off as well. So they're another sizable chunk of the industry over there. Now, if you've got all those people, they've got knowledge and skills. And look, it's YRP. I'm hearing lots of cheering and clapping because, yes, there's YRP as a professional network among people. But also you have NSAR, which is related to kind of growing the National Skills Academy for Rail. You've got the bodies that manage standards and innovation. So you've got the Railway Safety and Standards Board, the Rail Safety and Standards Board, but also the kind of the tram version of that. You've got UCRIN, which is the collective of universities that directly is plumbed into the railway, and you've got Innovate UK dishing out innovation cash, and you've got the professional bodies. So, you know, my beloved Permanent Way Institution, soon to be the Rail EI. You've got CIRO, you've got RSE, IMEC, IET, ICE, knowledge and skills. These are the bodies that protect those things. But also, you've got the universities and colleges that feed, that you know, update standards, that provide us research, but also provide us clever people in the form of graduates and apprentices. There's a gap on my thing. I'm getting there, folks. I'm getting there. I told you it was complicated, and I'm getting increasingly manic, and the string is getting tied around my thumb. Oh, yeah, don't forget, if things go wrong, you need to have knowledgeable people that can identify why they've gone wrong, and that's where the RAIB come in, the Rail Accident Investigation Branch. If you've got lots of people, they rightly should be represented, everyone join a union, by unions. So you have the RMT, you have the TSSA, you have Unison, you have ASLEF, and as we'll talk about in a minute, the NUJ counts in this because we have journalists within our rail industry as well. So, and that's not an exhaustive list of the unions, the trade unions who represent all of the staff who work on the railway. That covers a sizable chunk of them. But you also, if you've got a load of commercial entities, they want trade bodies. They want to be plugged into government and attempting to lobby why the railway is an important thing. So you have RIA, Rail Forum, the Rail Supply Group, and the Rail Wagons Association. Don't forget those guys. Whew, people are telling me to breathe in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Yes. So you have the trade bodies that represent most of the organizations in some form or another on here and kind of basically represent them to government, to central government and the devolved government bodies. And then you've got local authorities that interact with the devolved transport bodies and with central government and directly with train operators and with Network Rail. And you've got, on top of that, the community rail network that manage some of those smaller lines for their community value. And now, is there anything else? Yes, our beloved Railway Press, because don't forget them, they are also in here, which is why I put the NUJ in, because they are the ones who, in a way, hold the railway account. One of the various ways that the railway is held accountable is through the Railway Press.